My direct observation of globalization is after my comparison to the places I've been. So coming from China, a rapid urbanization place, and I went to Peru this winter. When I walk in the mall in Peru, I just feel exactly the same like I was in China. That make me very confused and shocked that it's totally different country and history and culture, but these certain places are so similar. And I think that's what globalization brings to the current world, that cheaper technology and cheaper, just the cost is lower to transport everything, to move information around, to let the world share similar things. It's very good for, I think, for economy in a way, but in culture, we need to consider more about globalization.
Globalization, although some people say it began long back, but I feel it's a relatively recent trend, especially like starting in the 1820s and then taking like course in the 1990s. So I'd say that it is closely related because with internet, with transportation, people are coming together. It's a lot about cross-cultural exchange. People are trading, people are investing in different areas, a lot of exchange of knowledge is happening. So I think what culture does is, while you are distinct from each other, it also brings you closer and you get to know about the other cultures, the other practices, other beliefs. So I think that way they are very closely related, and at times it's strange how you discover that somebody in US may be very similar to somebody else in India in terms of certain practices. That is a very common thing.
I don't know. As a South Korean, first of all, I'm very proud of my country in terms of globalization of business, because we have a lot of companies like Samsung, Hyundai, or mobile companies who do their business in Africa, United States, anywhere in the world. And by seeing that, I think that nowadays everything is just integrated all together, even business, culture, societies, people. Because I talk to my mom in South Korea every day, every morning and night. And I talk to my friend in Netherlands. And I use multinational companies' product like shampoo, clothes, or my iPhone. So I feel like globalization is just our everyday behavior. We go to school and meet people from all over the world, and even we learn about global marketing, globalization, international management. So I think globalization is one thing that people cannot ignore in these days, and one thing that's just involved in everyone's behavior in every daily basis.
The world is a smaller place because of the internet. The world is a smaller place because of the internet. Whatever time it used to take in the past to travel between two countries, it no longer takes that much amount of time. So to leverage this, companies have started expanding globally. You have manufacturing based out of China, design out of United States, and demand satisfaction somewhere else. Because of this global nature of the supply chain, it is imperative for people to understand the perspectives of people based out of China, Europe, and North America. So that's why you need to know about their beliefs, their cultures, their traditions.
From what I've seen and when I studied abroad as well in Italy, it seems that the increment in globalization is actually leading to more nationalism and more populism, like we saw with Trump and like we're seeing in Europe with Le Pen and those other people. It makes people fear the unknown because there's so much traffic going in and out of their countries. Their national identity seems to be diluted, or there's that perception that it's diluted. So people strongly associate with their cultures, right? Like we said before, like they care a lot about it sometimes, very patriotic or whatever, it's part of their culture. When there's a lot of immigration, that sort of thing, it seems like it's diluting it. And so people fear that, and there's more nationalism, and there's an increment in, fear of the foreigner, which is really sad. I would hope that it would be the other way around, obviously, that like when I traveled abroad to Italy, for example, what I learned there is that a lot of what we want is the same things, just, there's a different way to say it, not just language, but in the way you act. right? We all just want to be part of a group. We all want to be liked and accepted and that sort of thing. And hopefully, I thought that would hopefully lead to more unison, but it seems that it's not that way so far.
Globalization is the buzzword of the 21st century. But what is globalization? People often have different opinions about what globalization means for them. But what about you? What is globalization for you? In the next screen, you will see alternative definitions of globalization. I want you to please choose one of those definitions that better reflects your own opinion. Just pick the one that you think is the best one. So when we think globalization, we think international trade and cultural exchanges. And this often reminds me of the story of Marco Polo. If you have remembered that story, it's the Venetian merchant of the 13th century that embarked on an epic journey to Asia, returning after 24 years. His trip is not only an example of the history of trade between Asia and Europe, but also of how Europeans gain insights into Chinese culture. But when we think of globalization today, we think Marco Polo's voyages on asteroids. What took Marco Polo 24 years to accomplish can now be done in less than a week. So, globalization can be defined as the acceleration and intensification of economic interaction among the people, companies, and governments of different nations. When you choose responses before to three options, we could say that all of the above was really the correct answer. Globalization relates to accelerated international exchange of commerce. It's also related to interaction between people. And it's also this notion of multiculturalism, or being aware of how people in different cultures behave and think. So as nations come closer together in their interaction, a defining aspect of globalization is exactly this creation of multicultural space in contemporary societies. And this is one of the key things we're going to be covering in this module to understand how in a globalized world, culture is becoming a more increasingly important concept to understand consumer behavior. When we think about globalization, we can identify four forces connected to this phenomenon that impact brand marketing. The first one is growing multiculturalism. Second one is increased competition from every corner of the world. Third one is what we're going to refer to as cultural mixing. And the fourth one is connectivity and co-creation. And I'm going to describe next each of these forces in detail. So the first one is growing multiculturalism. Well, one of the things that has happened in the last 20 to 30 years is that the developed world is becoming more multicultural due to accelerated migration patterns. For instance, in the last 40 years in the United States, we have experienced a 4,400% growth in the number of immigrants, which now account for 13% of the US population. So this is a tremendous growth that has accelerated dramatically, particularly in the last 10 and 15 years. This growth is mainly driven by Hispanic migrants from Latin America, which in some regions of the country are now the majority of the population. Although these migrants tend to cluster in the south and southwest of the United States, closer to the Mexican border where immigration is happening at a faster pace, they are steadily moving into a sizable group in all regions of the United States. Multiculturalism is also growing in Western Europe. With the fall of the Iron Curtain, immigration from Central and Eastern European countries to Western Europe grew dramatically. In the early 90s, for example, the annual flow of migrants was approximately 150,000 individuals per year, which is more than twice the combined number of migrants in the prior 3 decades. More recently, the inflow of migrants into Western Europe is coming from the Middle East. This is reflected in the exponential growth of Muslims in France and Germany. We recently have seen with the crisis in some of the Middle Eastern countries how this is becoming a pressing issue in the politics of Western Europe, and particularly in France and Germany. But multiculturalism is not only being fueled by migrations, also by the increased cultural curiosity of individuals who learn about other cultures and can adopt some of their traditions and values. For instance, cultural curiosity is evident in the growth of language immersion programs in the United States. At an increasing rate, kids with an European American background are being immersed in programs taught in a foreign language, starting as early as in elementary school. Programs in Spanish and Chinese are becoming increasingly popular, and what you find is kids starting from kindergarten to learn the topics in elementary school in a foreign language. With this foreign language acquisition, it also comes along acquisition of cultural understanding of the cultures associated with these foreign languages. Cultural curiosity is also fueled by the growth of people who travel abroad to experience a new culture, which has more than doubled in the last 20 years. There's been a tremendous growth in international travel that's now bringing people in contact with foreign cultures, and they start learning about these cultures and acquiring knowledge about these cultures. Growing multiculturalism is also fueled by an emerging middle class in developing countries. Countries such as Brazil, China, and India have experienced tremendous growth, and now people in these countries can afford goods from around the world. So these are becoming global consumers that were not in the global market 20 or 30 years ago. Second force linked to globalization is the increased competition from every corner of the world. It used to be that global brands came from the developed world, as we're familiar with American and European companies with a global presence. However, as developing economies grow, companies from the developed world are well positioned to become global powerhouses. For instance, it is projected that in 2050, China will be the biggest economy in the world, India will be the third, and Brazil will be the fifth. So not surprisingly, we should find in the coming years that companies from these countries should become global powerhouses. So in the recent years, we've seen, for example, the presence of Embraer, a Brazilian company in the aerospace industry, an industry that used to be exclusive for the US and Europe. If we think about big aerospace companies, we think Boeing, we think Airbus. But now we have Embraer making inroads in this aerospace industry. Or we can also see Indian company Tata, that is a big company, a conglomerate of companies that have automobile and many other consumer products, that now owns Jaguar and Land Rover. Or Chinese Lenovo, which is the biggest personal computer manufacturer in the world. So we now see that the global marketplace is being inundated by brands that are coming not only from the developed world, but also for the developing economies. The third force linked to globalization is the mixing of cultures in the marketplace. An acceleration in economic interactions between countries is blurring the cultural boundaries of brand ownership and is promoting the juxtaposition of cultures in the marketplace. For instance, Italian Fiat's acquisition of Chrysler begs the question whether Chrysler is an American or an Italian brand. Or Belgium's InBev acquisition of Budweiser might lead us to question the Americanness of Budweiser, an icon of American culture. Similarly, with the acquisition of Smithfield Foods, the pork company maker of the iconic Virginia ham by a Chinese company, one might wonder whether ham and bacon are American anymore. So this juxtaposition of cultural meanings in brands due to brand ownership is one of the phenomena that we're going to be investigating in future videos. Fourth force linked to globalization is increased connectivity and co-creation. In a highly interconnected world in which internet penetration has grown almost 1,000% in the last 16 years to now include 50% of the population as internet users, people are becoming increasingly aware of new trends and developments happening throughout the world. They are increasingly aware of alternative lifestyles and traditions, which is also causing social change. Co-creation of meanings is apparent in many campaigns that brands have launched in the recent years, trying to leverage interconnectivity to get consumers engaged in a cultural conversation. We've also seen in the political arena in developments that have happened throughout the Middle East that were fueled by interconnectivity and social media. And that's also that is increasingly happening in the developed world too. What do we learn in this video? What have we covered in these last minutes? Globalization is the acceleration and intensification of economic interaction among the people, companies, and governments of different nations. The changes brought about by globalization are evident in consumers with growing multiculturalism, in competitors with increased global competition, and in the context in which companies do business through cultural mixing and increased connectivity.